I'm Alex Chu, and I'm a residential real estate broker with Keller Williams, Milwaukee. Welcome to the snack program offered virtually by the Rotary Club of Milwaukee each Thursday at noon. The snack program is less formal than our Tuesday programs, but keeps the high quality programming and content of Tuesday. Typically, we feature a member of Rotary or a Rotary connected organization with ideas pertinent to how we are living today. This program will last about 30 minutes. Today we'll hear from Andrew Hunt, Director of the Center for Real Estate at Marquette University, who will talk to us about the center and whether COVID is a temporary inconvenience or a paradigm shift for office work. Next week, please tune in at noon on Thursday as we welcome Rotarian Hector Colon, President and CEO of Lutheran Social Services, to discuss his new memoir, From Boxing Ring to Boardroom. There's no Tuesday program because of Election Day. Feel free to submit your questions via the chat button at the bottom of the screen. I'll keep an eye out for them and share them with the speaker once the planned remarks are complete. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew. Andrew Hunt is the Director for the Center for Real Estate at Marquette University. The center is the 12th ranked undergraduate real estate program by US News and World Report in 2020. Andy is responsible for the day-to-day leadership of student alumni, industry and outreach initiatives for the Center for Real Estate and Real Estate program at Marquette University. Prior to his current role, he was Associate Director of the program, where he organized its alumni board and kicked off the annual Strategies Conference, now in its 9th year. In between these two roles, Andy lived in Denver and worked in various positions in office, multifamily, retail, and industrial real estate investments, gaining experience in underwriting, cash flow modeling, marketing, tenant rep, portfolio management, acquisitions, and investment management. Andy received his BS in Business Administration from Marquette, majoring in real estate and finance. He also received his MBA, specializing in finance. Andy lives in Whitefish Bay with his wife and daughter. Please welcome Andy Hunt.
Well, thanks so much, Alex, and thank you to all of you wonderful Rotarians. It is really a pleasure to be able to join you today with the Rotary Club of Milwaukee. I have a long-standing, deep level of respect for Rotary International and the work that all of you do. And so it really is an honor to be able to spend some time with all of you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and get started in our tech. We were getting this going. There may be a little bit of a lag from time to time, so I might ask Alex, does everything look clear so far?
Looks great.
All right, wonderful. So we have a short amount of time today, and I'd like to jump right in. Alex, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for the invitation today. It's I'm looking forward to this discussion. This is something that I really actually care about quite a bit. In terms of my own research interests here at Marquette, the future of the workplace is something really at the heart of that. And that stems from a career that's been spent trying to understand how especially office works. I've been fortunate enough to be able to work in the office investment area for a large part of my career, which has been a very interesting place to be. And now that I'm at Marquette, I get to be able to study some of these trends on a daily, monthly, yearly basis as well. So some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, and of course the title of today's talk, I'm calling is the future of office post-COVID. So there's three kind of things that we want to touch on. First, let's talk a little bit about the headlines that we're all seeing today about what is happening in the office space. Second, I'm going to take you through what three experts are looking at, and we'll talk about them here in a little bit. And then in part three, we're going to go into a little bit of what we think the future is, and that's going to lead into our Q&A, because I would love for everyone to give their opinions. As you'll see, there's probably no simple answer to what the world might look like when we come out of the pandemic. But I think together we can come up with some of the ideas that maybe will help us all prepare for the different possibilities. So we hear a lot these days about is working from home forever? Are people no longer going to be going into offices? Are cities going to be empty? Is that the way things are going? So you see some of the headlines here. You've got really major companies like Twitter and Facebook and Microsoft that are going to work more remotely. Really kind of these big tech companies are important. I'll talk about that in a minute. Really interesting one here from Pinterest. Pinterest actually paid a lease break fee of almost $90 million to terminate this new office lease they were going to have in downtown San Francisco. That's really putting your money where your mouth is in terms of making a major change, which is really interesting. Some of you may have also heard that I think companies like Twitter or Facebook are offering pretty significant compensation packages in terms of working from home to make sure that people can set up their work from home offices and whatnot to really be ideal for working. But all of these are kind of interesting trends and something that it's worth paying attention to, because this is tech. And the reason why tech is worth paying attention to is because they've been driving a lot of office trends for a long time, actually. This concept of going to an open office environment and over the course of the last 20 years especially was really actually driven by tech, something that came out of the dot-com boom era in the late 90s and early 2000s, and has kind of trickled down to a lot of the rest of workplace culture, certainly white collar workplace culture on a national level, which is really interesting. But there are equally, if you're looking, a number of headlines and people out there saying that they're not convinced that going remote is the way to go in the long term. And I think that that's kind of, that brings us to a certain tension, because nobody really knows where things are going to go. And so as researchers at Marquette, what we do is we step back and we say, well, what are some of the principles that we know? And what does the research say? And then maybe instead of looking at what reporters are saying and trying to talk to as many people as possible, who are the best people we could possibly go to? So that brings to mind 3 different people that I want to talk to all of you about today. 2 of them are PhDs, one at Harvard, another at Stanford, and the third is the global CEO of a Fortune 128 real estate services company. All experts in their own regard, all with some really interesting ideas about what the future might hold for office. So let's get started. Our first gentleman is Ethan Bernstein. Ethan is the Edward W. Conrad Associate Professor of Business Administration at Harvard Business School. So he's an organizational behavior scientist. He looks at how organizations work. And his research areas really focus on workplace transparency and impacts on productivity. We actually had the chance to interview Ethan, myself, and the Bell Chair in Real Estate at Marquette, Dr. Anthony Pennington Cross, about a year and a half ago, as we were preparing our research for our 8th annual Strategies Conference in 2019, which, of course, the topic was the future of the workplace. And Ethan has done some really interesting research that is worth noting. I call it his greatest hits. So these are the 3 things that I want to share with all of you today. Again, in light of not knowing, none of us really knowing what's going to happen in the workplace, let's look at what some of the research might say about where things might go in the future. And Ethan is a fantastic place to start. Great guy, by the way. When we spoke to him in the summer of 2019, he was working from Utah, where he was staying with some family pre-pandemic, but he was working remotely, right? So that he is certainly on top of some of these trends. So he had 3 papers, or kind of 3 articles that he's come out with in the last several years that I think focus on what we're trying to get at today. One called The Transparency Trap, another called The Truth About Open Offices, and the third, The Implication of Working Without an Office, which came out earlier this year and is directly tied to this work from home phenomenon thanks to COVID-19. So the first one is the transparency trap. So what is the transparency trap? So Transparency inherently, we may assume, we may theorize that transparency is good within an organization, especially good within an office working environment. That work that's conducted in the open allows people to be held more accountable for that work. You can see what they're doing, and then people are therefore going to be more productive because they're being held accountable. And maybe if there's problems, it's more easy to flag things, and collaboration can be maximized because you're all together. Now, what he found was there's actually a paradox when it comes to transparency. So some of the good that happens in the workplace from a transparent environment, and I'm talking about not transparent in terms of information sharing necessarily, what is management doing, et cetera, but I'm talking about some of the visual components of that transparency as well, that you can see who you're working with, you can see who's at their desk, you can see if they're working hard or are they sitting back on their cell phone, right, playing Candy Crush maybe. So there's a paradox here, because there is some good to that, but there's also some of that stifles some things like experimentation. So anyway, Ethan designed an experiment to try to look at this, which is fascinating. And so what he did was he went to China, and he approached the second largest mobile phone factory in the world in China. So this company has 14,000 people working in a 1 million square foot facility. And what Ethan did was he set up the experiment in two ways. So the first time that he went out to this facility, he planted 3 graduate students who were all of Chinese origin, spoke fluent Mandarin within the factory, just to record what was going on, to get a kind of a baseline of what was happening within the factory, and from a productivity standpoint, how they were doing in terms of producing some of these mobile phone units. He then came back several months later, and he same students, put them back on the line. And he started an experiment where he said, well, what if we take this 1 million square foot facility and we simply do one thing? We put up screens that are blocking people from seeing one another. Now, you can imagine what a facility like this looks like. It's huge, several football fields in size, all inside, with all these components going through different lines being manufactured. And from a management standpoint, you could stand up on a podium area, on a raised area, and you could see everybody across this floor that spans way out into the distance, right? Lots of transparency in terms of being able to see the workers. When he came back and he actually put up these screens, the fascinating thing that happened was productivity raised by 10 to 15% on the 4 lines that the screens were separating people into, kind of more like pods of around 30 people, than the other 28 lines that were not screened off. And the fascinating part about it was, what he realized was that within a little bit more of a less transparent setting, people had the opportunity to do things like innovate, be willing to try things that might not work in order to do their job faster, and not be held and not get in trouble, if you will, for trying something new, something out of the normal. Remember, when you're in a very, very transparent environment and you're trying something new, people can easily see that you're doing something that's not necessarily normal. The way that Bernstein talks about this is he says you have a front stage self and a backstage self. So your front stage self automatically knows you're on. You're kind of on display. The audience can see you. You need to behave in a certain way that is expected of you. Your backstage self, however, you can experiment a little bit more. You're less worried about what other people are thinking about you, and you're more worried maybe about getting the work done that you need to get done. So anyway, Bernstein said, okay, this is really interesting, but there's more that we can do to try to figure this out. And by the way, this graph, what you can see here is this black line is the 15-day moving average of the experimental group over the 5-month period that they were there. And the lighter gray line here is the control groups that didn't have the screens. So over a 5-month period, you can see how that productivity increased in terms of the output of those workers. So Bernstein came back and he said, okay, well, we need to look at this. That was in one setting, but we need to look at this more in an office setting. What does that look like? So he designed another experiment. This time it involved 2 corporate headquarters, Fortune 500 companies located on the East Coast, that were making big moves from more traditional office space, maybe with quite a few closed door offices and high cubicle walls, to what we would consider a more traditional open office environment. Low cube walls, you can kind of see where everybody's working, maybe even no offices whatsoever. And so what he did was he recruited a bunch of volunteers to wear these sensors. There were, I think, about 150 people over the course of both of these companies. And he wanted to track them for several months in terms of their interactions, especially their face-to-face interactions, but also their digital interactions, instant messages, use of email, across both when they were in their old office environment, the traditional office environment, and when they were in their new office environment. Now, of course, we all theorize that when you have an open office environment, there's going to be more collaboration. People are going to be working together. It's easier to see, hey, I see Alex over here. I'm going to go ask Alex a question, and et cetera. Well, what he found, contrary to that belief that there would be more of that face-to-face interaction, that interaction actually dropped significantly, almost 70%, 70% in both cases, with an associated increase in electronic interaction. So to put it even more simply, rather than these open office environments prompting people to get up, have this vibrant face-to-face collaboration, that kind of open architecture environment actually triggered this human response to socially withdraw from their office mates and interact instead over a digital sphere where they felt like they had more control. Interesting, fascinating result that he got, obviously, and this is the first time where somebody, as far as we could tell from the literature, that somebody had tried to measure this kind of a change when you're going from a traditional office environment to a more open office environment. And essentially, what Bernstein said about this was, look, these open office environments aren't inherently bad. But when you are setting them up in such a way where, again, people have a front stage self and they feel like they're always on, they're probably going to innovate less. They're probably going to take chances less. They're probably going to feel like they can't necessarily take breaks because they're, where they need to recharge or they need to cut up their flow and then keep going, because they feel like they're on display, and that actually makes them less productive. So setting up office environments that are a little bit more varied than just this big open environment is probably more conducive to productivity. So what does he say about now? Well, I think we're running a little bit low on time, so I'm not going to play this video for you, but there's about a 2-minute video where he talks about now. What's the implication of working without an office in this day and age, right? Now, the link to this video, by the way, is in the notes, in the PDF notes to this presentation that I've made available to Michelle and Alex. So all of you should have access to that, as well, by the way, as links to all of these studies that I'm going to be talking about today, too. So I encourage you to go take a look at that video. But here are kind of the 3 takeaways that you're going to want to know from this. There's some good, of course, about working from home. But there were 3 things that working from home is really bad at doing, right? So number 1, fostering relationships among employees. 2, onboarding new employees. And 3, helping to cultivate these weak ties that we have at work, right? So we may be really good in this day and age, now that we're 7 months into the COVID crisis, at interacting with people that we know really well. But it's those interactions around the water cooler, those collisions that we have within the workspace, and maybe not even necessarily within the workspace, but other networking functions. We all would be together today, right now, somewhere in Milwaukee, right? I mean, we would have conversations before we met today. We'd have conversations after we met today. Those are what are called weak ties, but sometimes those weak ties lead to really important interactions and opportunities for ourselves. And all of those are really hurt by the pandemic. So it's another reason why, and it's one of those kind of curious clues we should kind of keep in our mind in terms of what might happen when the pandemic ends in terms of returning to work. All right, let's move forward. We're moving quickly through this. Nicholas Bloom is the second gentleman that we want to look at. He works at the Stanford Graduate Business School, so he's an economist. And what he likes to study is management, but he also likes to study productivity, much like Bernstein, and he likes to study work from home. So his 2 greatest hits involve a really interesting study that he did over the course of 2 years that culminated in 2013, and another kind of look back at that in 2020, trying to compare and contrast what happened in that study versus what we're experiencing today, and what continues to be true and what isn't necessarily. So let's dive into his first study. It's called Does Working from Home Work? Evidence from a Chinese Experiment. So what Bloom did was he also went to China and worked with a major Chinese travel agency. So they had about 16,000 employees. They're publicly traded on the NASDAQ version of the stock exchange in China. And a lot of these were call center employees, right? A travel agency, call center, working with clients, solving their issues, helping them set up vacations, things like that. So what he did was he asked for volunteers to be part of a study, and they couldn't know what was going to happen in the study, but it was purely volunteer based. And so then he randomly assigned these volunteers into several hundred people into two different groups. And these groups would work for 9 months in one of two ways. One, a control group, they would continue to work in the office like nothing had changed. And the second group for those 9 months would go and work from home, would be taking all their calls from home, etc. What he found was that the ones that went and worked from home saw a 13% performance increase. And when he tried to measure what exactly, was the performance increase, he found that 9% of that was that they were working more minutes per shift, right? So they're taking fewer breaks and having fewer sick days. And the other 4% was that they were able to make more calls per minute, mainly because they were in a quieter work environment versus being packed in with a bunch of other call center colleagues. So when this was rolled out to the entire company, half of the people at the company decided to go work from home, and productivity almost doubled. It went to 22%, some sort of effect of knowing that something positive was happening with this. And when employees chose to go home and work from home, they kind of expected their productivity was going to go up, and it went up even more than they thought before. So Bloom, for a long time, has been looked at this huge advocate of working from home. But now let's fast forward a little bit to today. What does he think about this today? Bloom will be one of the first to tell you that he's not so sure that working from home is actually a great idea. And so he said, what is happening today is very, very different than what happened in the case of this Chinese travel agency. So there's a couple of reasons behind that. So number one, he sees that there's a slump in productivity. So with the Chinese travel agency, they could only do it if they, one, had a home office that was not in a bedroom, and number two, that there was nobody else in the room working together. Remember, this was a call center. They were taking calls. They really had to have that private environment when they were doing this at home. Interestingly, that's not what a lot of us are experiencing these days, whether it's having spouses with us or kids with us or dogs interrupting us. This is something that we have more interruptions in a lot of cases today, especially for millennial workers and the Gen Z workers that are coming in right behind them. Millennial workers are now the largest percentage of workers in the workforce, by the way, as baby boomers are retiring out. Gen X is a little bit of a smaller cohort in general, and millennials is this huge group. So this really matters in terms of having those kinds of interruptions. The second thing is he's seen a real slump in innovation. So in-person collaboration that's necessary for creativity, it's not happening. He shows that he has some research that shows that face-to-face meetings are really essential for developing new ideas and for maintaining the focus of these meetings. I'll throw the question out to you. How many of you have been on group video calls where people are focusing on something else or have their camera off, right? In fact, some of you may be doing that right now. I don't necessarily blame you, by the way. But that's part of our world, that you can much more easily be distracted in these meetings, and that doesn't necessarily help in terms of coming up with these innovative ideas and making sure that we're focused. And he thinks that in the long run that we're going to see some slower growth and less innovation, which is going to hurt us on the whole. He also notes some mental health issues and growing inequality. So on the mental health side, he noted that that Chinese firm, at the end of the experiment, half of those people who were working from home at the start decided to go back into the office. Why? Because despite having an average of a 40-minute commute, they wanted the socialization of being around their peers. And they didn't want to feel isolated and being alone at home. A lot of us are feeling that way today as well. And research backs this up in a lot of ways too. So working from home is not exactly the same, but it's, it's all this stuff today than it was then. And he's really pointing this out. And of course, the inequality. In some of his studies, working with the Federal Reserve, he's noted that 65% of Americans have fast enough internet to support workable video calls, right? We are part of the 65% right now. That means that there's 35% that don't. And only 50% of those said that they could work at home at an efficiency that was at least 80% of what they had before, which is really interesting. But think about it, the rest don't have that. That really hurts. And especially this is true of people who are educated, higher earning, and they're the ones that are more likely to continue to be able to get their work done when they're working from home, to continue to get paid, develop skills, advance in their careers. Everybody else is left behind. That's a gap that is starting to occur in our world right now, which is interesting. He notes that there's some still good, right? The stigma behind working from home has really gone away. This has been a bit of a boom for suburbs and for rural areas. You hear, some of you may have heard of, you've heard of boom towns out west. Now you've got things like Zoom towns. In fact, if you Google Zoom towns, you'll see a really interesting article about some of these small towns in the West that are really trying to keep up with the demand for housing that is happening in small places. We're talking less than 25,000 people in these towns. So there are really serious drawbacks to going permanently remote that we as leaders really need to be thinking of. So lastly, I want to talk about Bob Slantic very briefly. Bob Slantic is the president and chief executive officer of CBRE Group, right? So Bob, they're a Fortune 128 company, the largest real estate services firm in the world, over 100,000 employees and over 100 offices across the globe. And recently, Bob, actually, we featured him at a conference here at Marquette. It was a virtual conference, of course. It was our this fall's Real Estate Strategies Conference. Here's a quick photo of Bob and I together as I was interviewing him. And we went at Bob and we said, what are some of the early signs that you are seeing today that occupiers are making? 92 of the Fortune 100 companies are their clients. So what are those massive firms doing in terms of making decisions about this? Bob had some really, really interesting things to say. He said, first of all, working from home has proven to be effective with a lot of benefits, but it lacks the company culture that really is needed to be successful. Second, that problem solving and collaboration among teammates and onboarding new people are really impossible if everybody stays home all the time. He said going forward for CBRE, some people will be working from home though. So this is a bit of a new normal. But he thinks that that'll probably be a little bit more part-time and that for the most part, people are going to be back in the office. In fact, he's estimating that at least 80% of people are going to return to the office most of the time across the United States based off of what they're seeing. And of course, he comes back to one of the same things that Bloom said, that people need people. That we can improve our lives, of course, by traveling less, commuting less, and having more opportunities to be at home, but being together really is necessary sometimes, and that's something that's real. So let's make a couple predictions about the future. As I go through all of this, if I had to summarize all of it, here are the three things that I would think about. Number one, I think that absolutely there's going to be more flexibility within the workspace. That leaders are going to say, if people need to work from home a little bit more often, they can, and that the stigma is gone. And I think that will probably stick based on what we've seen out there. And there's certainly going to be a cohort of people that decide to work from home forever. But I don't think that that's going to be everybody. The second thing related to this is I'm expecting there's going to be more space per employee. Now, I think this is the highest likelihood of being wrong. I'm highest likelihood of being wrong about that because space is a money-driven thing. It's expensive to have a lot of office space. But at the same time, we're getting used to social distancing. And I think that there's a real likelihood that people may not give back a lot of office space. They may say, well, we're going to maintain this space. We're going to have more space for the people that come in, so that when they come in, they can separate a little bit. They don't have to have that front stage self on as much as possible, and they can feel more productive. This is a trend that was starting before the pandemic occurred and is, I believe, accelerating after. But again, I have the highest likelihood, I think, of being wrong about this because money drives a lot of that. And last but certainly not least, we can't forget innovation. it really is going to be hard for companies to innovate if they're not having a lot of what they're doing in person. And I think that's going to be another major driver that's going to bring people back into the office. So with all of this, I'm going to leave you with one thing. It's a Chinese, there's this old Chinese proverb that maybe some of you have heard of before, but it kind of goes like this. So there's this farmer, hey, and he had a son, a farmer and his son. He had this beloved stallion who they helped the family earn a living. So one day the horse ran away and their neighbors exclaimed, "Your horse ran away. Oh, what terrible luck." The farmer said, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few days later, the horse returned and he was leading a few wild mares back to the farm as well. The neighbors shouted, "Your horse has returned and brought more horses with him. What great luck." The farmer said, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." Later that week, the farmer's son was trying to break in one of those new mares, and the mare threw him to the ground, breaking his leg. The villagers go, "Oh, your son broke his leg. What terrible luck." Again, the farmer said, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." A few weeks later, soldiers from the National Army marched through the town, recruiting all of the able-bodied boys for the army. They didn't take the farmer's son because he was still recovering from that leg injury. And the friends, of course, the neighbors shouted, "Your boy is spared. What tremendous luck." To which the farmer replied, "Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see." So, of course, the moral of that story, right, that no event in and of itself can truly be judged as good or bad, unlucky or lucky, fortunate or unfortunate, that only time will truly tell the story. So with that, I see that we're right to the end of our time. Alex and Michelle, I'm so sorry about that. I'm happy to stay on a little bit extra for anybody else who would like to join and answer some questions. But thank you so much again for your time today. It's really been a pleasure to spend time with you. And please feel free to reach out to me at any time. My information is available on Marquette's website if any of you would like to talk a little bit more.
Thanks, Andy. That was just a terrific presentation. I guess those of you who need to go, but I guess we can stick around for a few questions. There are none on the chat screen right now, but I'll start off with a question. So, historically, office buildings have been classed as Class A, Class B, Class C. Do you suppose there's going to be a new Class A, even though, we've built brand new buildings this year with the BMO Tower and the Hush Blackwell Tower? The new Class A might have, larger places, larger bathrooms, larger places to sanitize, different kinds of separations. What does your crystal ball say in that area?
Yeah, it's a great question, Alex, and fascinatingly as well. When you think about these Class A buildings, and BMO is a great example of this. When we think about pandemics, and we think about especially this one, the transmission is really highly related to aerosolization of the virus. And so HVAC, heating and cooling units in these buildings become really, really important at the end of the day. What buildings have the best HVAC units anywhere? It's those Class A buildings. So Mark Ergens and Ergens, BMO, the owners of BMO Tower, they can tout, hey, we've got the best HVAC units in the city right now. If you want to make sure that you're safe, not just now in the pandemic, but in the future, you want people to avoid getting sick with the flu or the common cold throughout the year, come here. Yeah, you might pay a little bit more because we're brand new and we're Class A. But from a health standpoint, from a wellness of your employees, we can make a really, really good argument for we're the place that you want to be. Class B and Class C buildings, Alex, in a lot of cases, they're trying to figure this out as well. There are some mobile units in terms of cleaning air ducts and air systems that exist out there. In fact, there's a restaurant in the North End. It's not Bull and Butcher. That's a different one. But I'm forgetting the name. But they actually have these air cleaning units spaced throughout the tables, because they're trying to make it a safer environment for their patrons. So it's not just office, Alex, it's actually retail and other uses as well. They're saying we need to find a way to do this. And hopefully that means that the class of that potential facility that they're in is a safer environment for people that want to actually come in and patronize them.
If I owned a Class C building, though, I'd say, hey, I can open the windows and you can't.
Yeah, that's true. Although in the wintertime, we'd also have to make sure we're really invested in great coats, right? For the times that those windows were open.
Right.
I had a question about what do you think the impact of this will be on residential real estate? You know, we've watched for years as the high rises have gone up and people living in smaller and smaller spaces because they wanted to be able to be downtown where they could walk to their offices. And now they're finding themselves stuck in 800 square feet and, you know, unable to deal with their cat.
Yeah, right. Or the toddler running around, right? Or the spouse where, you know, there's I've seen some, and by the way, Joanne, really great to see you again. We're spending a lot of time together and I love that. So, you know what, I've seen some funny headlines before where, you know, spouses are turning to one another and going, oh, so that's what you do all day? Which is really real. And the Chinese travel company where, you know, they set up that experiment where all of them were working from home offices that were off on their own. That's not what we're experiencing these days, right? So what we've noticed, and we had a conversation actually a couple weeks ago with Joe Horning. So Joe Horning is the CEO of Shore West Realtors, right? Shore West, by some measures, the largest home sales firm, residential sales firm in Wisconsin, right up there with First Weber. And Joe was kind of saying to us, it's been crazy what's happening. So some of you may have seen that home sales, by the way, are way outpacing what anybody ever expected. Now, certainly that's partially related to the fact that interest rates are so low. Why wouldn't you take advantage of trying to do that? But at the same time, there's not as much supply out there. And so the value of homes is going way up because people are trying, like you said, to get out of those small apartments or those small condos in the densified kind of urban areas, and they want to get more space. They want to spread out. So that's number one. Prices are going way up for the smaller level of supply that's on the marketplace. So there's still a relatively healthy home sales market out there, especially if you're a seller. Now, interestingly, when you talk to home builders, what they will tell you is they're starting to get more and more requests for people to make sure that they have home offices or at least areas that are very Zoom friendly, right? Having a bookcase behind you with a little plant is great. Like Alex, your background looks fantastic, right? I mean, it's like the perfect background. And people are trying to get that in their home. So if you're building a new home, people are looking for those kinds of things as well. And interesting, the longer we do this, and maybe some of you are the same way, you're finding ways to repurpose a part of your home really into an office. And maybe you went through multiple phases of that, right? For the first couple of weeks, you're like, well, I'm just going to keep working from my kitchen table, which is where I usually do stuff sometimes when I'm working from home. And then all of a sudden you found a corner in another part of the house and you said, oh, that's great. And then maybe there was even a third move that you did where, oh, I've got multiple monitors now and this is working fabulous. So yeah, I mean, this is a real thing where people are thinking about when they're going through homes now, and realtors are telling us this, they're thinking about what is my life going to be like if I want to work from home there, because I expect I'm going to be working from home somewhat in the future. Great question, Joanne.
That basement office in Whitefish Bay just doesn't seem the same these days.
That's right. Although there's a beautiful tree outside of my window that has been changing this fall that I've really been enjoying, Alex.
So we have a question from Jeff Martinka. He said, would you say employers should push folks to come back as soon as safe or let them stay working from home longer? Seems like the examples could be used on both sides to me. I'm imagining future home offices with fake bookcase backgrounds that tastefully have diverse titles exposed.
Yeah, it's Jeff, I think you just nailed kind of the heart of what I think is going on right now. What do we actually do when we open? Which side of this data do you use? And what you'll notice, by the way, the more that you do this is a lot of these studies that I cited today are actually cited on both sides of the spectrum to try to make whatever case somebody wants to make. It's funny, when we actually interviewed Ethan Bernstein, when we were collaborating with him as we were preparing our research, he made that exact point. He said, I really touched a nerve when I started doing some of this open office research, because you have people on both sides that say, well, on one hand, we're going to save a lot of money, we need to do this. And on the other hand, people are saying, I hate this. You probably saw the Bose ad, right? Where even the headphone makers like Bose are saying, hey, put your headphones on and you'll have your work from home. It's like closing the door on your office. They can do advertisements like that because these open office environments almost require you sometimes to have like headphones to be able to shut out the rest of the world. So what I would encourage leaders to do is to really step back and say, What's a bit of the middle ground? I think flexibility is absolutely the middle ground. We've proven that we can do this work from home stuff, but you're also seeing the data say that when it comes to things like being innovative and people wanting to collaborate and be together, that you probably need a flexible enough policy that you say, if you need to work from home, maybe you don't have a lot of meetings that have to be in person that day. Maybe it's a Monday, maybe it's a Friday, go ahead and do it. But we're going to be more based on what you actually get done than seeing you in the office and being like, okay, because you're sitting in that desk, I know that you're being productive, which we know isn't necessarily the case, because people might be putting on a facade to try to match what they're supposed to look like, when in reality, they're not necessarily getting stuff done. So that all-encompassing kind of strategy to say, I think we want you back in the office. If you want to continue to work from home, some companies may say, go for it. I think Twitter and Facebook really feel that way. But I really have a feeling that a lot of companies are going to say, we also want you to come back to the office for as much as you can. And I think a large percentage of employees will also say, you know what, I'd like to be back in the office a couple of days. I love the flexibility of being able to have, work from I finally figured out my work from home office environment. I really want to be able to still do that sometimes. So I want that flexibility, but I think there's still going to be that demand for people being in the office, because we're social human beings. We're social by nature. We still want to be together, and we want to be able to innovate. Great question, Jeff.
In the meantime, back to Joanne's statement, I think as a realtor, we see more demand for fancier kitchens and workout rooms, because now the activities that used to occur at the office have to be at home. You have one more meal at home that you have to figure out. You have to figure out where to work out as well. So why
is Peloton doing so well, right, Alex?
Right, yeah. One last thing I wanted to sneak in. We have constraints of time, but since we both live in the North Shore area, do you want to talk about a bit about retail and whether or not we're ever going to see shopping centers come back?
Oh my gosh, retail, as you saw on my presentation, was kind of like one of the other top three things that I'm most interested in from a research standpoint. So yeah, would love to talk about retail. So a couple of interesting things. Experiential retail has really been a trend for a long time, right? And so experiential retail being all about, I want to go to a place and do something that I can't do anywhere else. It's not necessarily going to a place and shopping, because so much of that can be done online these days, especially as e-commerce has risen over the last decade and a half or so, and Amazon. This is really the real deal. So in terms of like the long-term nature of retail, I have a personal belief, based on what we're seeing and what the research is coming out, is that experiential retail will come back. We have to get through the pandemic, but people are going to want to come out and do these activities. Brookfield Square is a really great example. With the addition of like the theater and the whirly ball and knocking down part of the mall. What they have done there is a prime example of what's happening to malls all over the country, that they have to become more experiential. The interesting part is you actually have some of these big landlords trying to do whatever they can to help a lot of these retailers as well, because they know if we can just navigate and get through this pandemic, that demand is still going to be back. In fact, at Marquette, we for part 3 of our conference, which is next week, we've been asking people what they think trends are going to be for the next 10 years. We didn't want to ask them what their opinions were for the next year or two, because that's so heavily COVID influenced. We wanted to know what we thought the next 10 years were going to be. And interestingly, we're seeing a lot of people have the feeling that, yeah, retail is going to return to normal, but it's still going to be more experience based. There's a little bit, by the way, of a culling of retailers that have tried to do things that are more innovative versus less innovative right now too, Alex. So for example, and as consumers, all of you know this. If you can drive up to a restaurant and they'll walk their food out to you, and you can just order from that restaurant online with some sort of app they have, or just right from their website, and it's kind of a contactless type system, you're probably more likely to feel safe about going into that property. The same is true for retailers that clothing or your Kohl's or whatnot. Anybody who's communicating really well about the safety measures that they're taking are really getting ahead. And a lot of this has to do with communication. There are other retailers who are not necessarily taking those steps, and some of those are going out of business. But what we're seeing is it's location. I'll leave it with this: the location, right? That's what you know about real estate. And those retailers who are located in the best locations before a pandemic, those are still some of the best locations during the pandemic and will continue to be the best locations after the pandemic. So those are the landlords that are most likely to continue to do the best. And by the way, very excited about the new Target here in Bayshore, Alex. Really, really excited about that.
Yeah, how does a person ask a question?
Sure.
How does a person ask a question?
Hey, RL, you're unmuted, so you can certainly ask.
Shoot, RL, yeah, go for it.
I'm just wondering, in terms of some of the research that was done, did anybody look at work that was more routinized versus more ambiguous to see which environment seemed to be most compatible?
Kind of. I think is the answer. The two things that come to mind are when you're thinking about, number one, the call center, right? Pretty routine. Now, and maybe the question actually for you, RL, is, are you talking about more like blue collar or white collar type work?
Just repetitive work. Could be white collar repetitive. Most people think of blue collar repetitive, but you know, there's a lot of white collar work that's very routinized as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where I'm trying to go with this is it's that divide between, can you do your work from home? Do you have that capability, or do you have to go into an office environment, right? So I think what they're kind of seeing here is that when it's in an office environment type of setting, obviously people are feeling a little bit less safe about that these days. And so what employers are trying to do is do whatever they can to keep people safe. That's where you see the mask mandates. That's where you see, trying to make these HVAC systems better, to make the air circulation safer for everybody that's working there. So these studies didn't necessarily look at what is productivity, how has productivity been impacted during the pandemic. It's just a little bit too soon to know about that. It was really more focused on what does work from home in general look like for more tasks that are computer focused, right? Like that call center example. So not a great answer for that question, RL, but I think that it's a wonderful question, and I hope that maybe there's some research that comes out of that in the next couple months, now that we're getting a little bit more time frame that some of these researchers are looking at.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you see upgrades to like bar and restaurant HVAC systems so that we can all go back to our favorite restaurants? Will there be like a class A, B, and C bar air quality, you know?
It's a really good question. You know, interestingly, Alex, let's talk about HVAC for a second. I know it sounds boring, but it's really, really important, right? And it's not something that a lot of people are talking about, not as much as they probably should. Epidemiologists are, of course, talking about this. But one of the things that's noteworthy, so Bob Salentic at CBRE, right? So a couple of years ago, I think it was 2015, they purchased JCI's Workplace Solutions Group. What does JCI's Workplace Solutions Group do? They heavily focus on these kinds of issues that pertain to HVAC, right? So building systems is something that JCI does really, really well. Hey, JCI, we love them, right? They're located right here in Milwaukee, you know, offices downtown, offices in Glendale. We love JCI, and the unit that CBRE purchased that focusing on these workplace solutions and these business systems was their best performing unit in the second quarter and the third quarter of this year during the middle of the pandemic. Not totally surprising when you think exactly what we're talking about right now. Building owners and managers know that they need to go out and they need to upgrade these systems. And that includes office, but it's also, it absolutely includes retail as well, Alex. You know, I went and got my hair cut a few weeks ago. I was looking real shaggy, Alex, and I really needed it. And when I sat down, of course, everybody had to wear masks, and you couldn't come in until they let you in the door. You had to wait outside ahead of time. So they're doing all this stuff that anybody can do. But I sit down in the chair, and there's this little black box sitting next to me. And I say to Elena, who's cutting my hair, I say, Elena, what is this? And she goes, it's a high efficiency air filter. It's taking the air from this immediate area, filtering out any harmful particles, including COVID, if it were in the air, and returning clean air. These things can be purchased at an individual level for any size of business. So there are businesses that are doing that now, and there are some that are not. And it kind of goes back to what's going to happen in the long term and how are those businesses going to be impacted. I think the ones that are making those investments are probably most likely to do really, really well, because I can tell you, Alex, I feel really good about going in the men's room barbershop on Oakland Avenue in Shorewood right now.
Well, offline, we'll have to go into your best stock tips for HVAC systems, I guess.
Yeah, right.
You know, on the interest of time and the fact that we have no more questions, I guess we'll have to close out. But thank you so much. This was fascinating. Hope to have you again, and maybe you'll consider joining us.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, fellow Rotarians. God bless you all, and stay safe out there. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.